No one on the Galactic Standards Committee liked dealing with humans. It wasn't because they were violent. Plenty of species had violent histories. The Carthans had wiped out 3 of their own continents before discovering orbital flight. The Virex had once considered planetary bombardment a form of diplomacy. No, violence wasn't the problem. It was inconsistency. Director Solek had spent the last 11 cycles reviewing human behavioral reports, and every single one of them contradicted the last. Humans could cooperate on a global scale to build orbital stations that circled their world like glittering halos, and in the same breath, refused to agree on something as simple as shared measurement systems. They could create organizations dedicated to peace, unity, and mutual survival, and simultaneously fund weapons capable of erasing entire cities in seconds. Solek leaned back in his chair, his elongated fingers tapping lightly against the crystalline surface of the table. The data stream hovering before him flickered through thousands of human records: wars, treaties, inventions, collapses, recoveries. Patterns existed, but they never lasted. "That's the problem," he muttered quietly. Across the table, Analyst Viral tilted her head, her 3 eyes narrowing in synchronized focus. "You've identified a contradiction?" she asked. Solek exhaled slowly.
"No," he said.
"I've identified too many." The chamber dimmed slightly as the Central Intelligence adjusted the display. A rotating model of human civilization appeared above the table, fractured, segmented, layered into hundreds of governing bodies, each marked by different colors, borders, and affiliations. It looked less like a unified species, and more like a battlefield frozen in time. 553 recognized governing entities, Viral said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. And that does not include unregistered factions, corporate sovereignties, or independent colonies. Solek nodded. "And every one of them claims authority," he added. A pause settled between them. Then Viral asked the question that had been quietly forming in every report, every meeting, every failed attempt to categorize humanity. "How does a species like this function?" Solek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he expanded the data field. New layers appeared: weapons reports, military structures, civilian ownership records. The display became denser and denser until it was almost impossible to distinguish one system from another. "That's just it," Solek finally said. "They don't function the way we expect." He zoomed further in. A single human settlement appeared. Then another. Then hundreds. Each with its own defensive systems, its own technologies, its own interpretations of what constituted security. Some relied on energy shields, others on projectile weapons. Some had both. Some had things that didn't fit into any known classification at all. Viral leaned forward slightly. "This level of variance," she said slowly, "it's not just inefficient." "No," Solek interrupted. "It's unpredictable." That word lingered in the air. Unpredictable. In the Galactic Council, unpredictability was worse than hostility. Hostility could be measured, modeled, prepared for. Unpredictability meant one thing: failure of control. Solek closed the display with a single motion. The floating projections collapsed into nothingness, leaving the chamber quiet. Too quiet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Viral broke the silence. "If they cannot be predicted," she said carefully, "they cannot be integrated." Solek's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "That," he said slowly, "is exactly what we're about to test." The emergency session was called less than 3 hours later. That alone was unusual. The Galactic Standards Committee did not move quickly. It couldn't. Every decision required layers of verification, cross-species agreement, and predictive modeling. Urgency was considered a flaw in process. And yet, the chamber was full. Representatives from 7 species sat around the circular table, their forms wildly different: scaled, furred, chitinous, amphibious, but all unified by the same subtle tension in their posture. At the center of the room, a single directive hovered in cold, white text. "Human integration requirement. Pending." Director Solek stood beneath it. "You've all reviewed the preliminary reports," he began, his voice calm but carrying easily across the chamber. You understand the situation. A low murmur rippled through the assembly. Some nodded. Others didn't. It was Zorith who spoke first, a tall, multi-limbed delegate whose upper sensory nodes rotated independently as he addressed the room. Understanding the situation, Zorith said, does not make it acceptable. Salek inclined his head slightly. Clarify. Zorith gestured sharply, and the central display expanded again, this time not showing human society, but something far more specific. Weapons. Thousands of entries flickered into existence. Then tens of thousands. Then more, layer upon layer of classifications, subcategories, and unknown markers. The display strained to organize them. It failed. What you are seeing, Zorith said, is an incomplete dataset. A highly incomplete dataset. He paused, letting that settle. This, he continued, represents less than 3% of confirmed human weapon systems. A silence followed that statement. Not the quiet of calm, but the quiet of calculation. Salek didn't react outwardly. Internally, he had already done the math. 3%. That meant the total number wasn't just large. It was unmanageable. The requirement is clear. Zorith pressed on. Every species admitted into the Galactic Council must provide a complete and verified inventory of all weapons within their possession. He turned slightly, addressing the room as a whole. This is not optional. It is the foundation of our shared security protocols. Several delegates signaled agreement. This rule was ancient, unquestioned, necessary. Without it, the Council could not calibrate defense systems, regulate conflicts, or even define what constituted a threat. It was, quite literally, the rule that kept civilizations from destroying each other. Zorith turned back to Salek. And yet, he said, his tone tightening, we are attempting to apply this requirement to a species that does not even agree with itself. A faint shift moved through the chamber. Now the real issue had been spoken aloud. Salek stepped forward slightly. The rule exists for a reason, he said. Humanity will not be exempt from it. Then humanity will fail. Another voice cut in. This one came from Lethra, an amphibious delegate whose translucent skin revealed the rapid pulsing of her internal systems. They cannot produce what we are asking for, she continued. Not because they refuse, but because they cannot. She gestured toward the display. Multiple governments. Independent militaries. Private corporations developing weapons in secrecy. Civilian populations with unrestricted access to armaments. Her voice sharpened. You are not asking for a report. You are asking for omniscience. That word hit harder than anything else so far. Omniscience. Total knowledge. Impossible knowledge. Salek let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. Every species we have integrated, he said slowly, has faced this requirement. And every species we have integrated, Zorith replied immediately, has had a centralized structure capable of fulfilling it. That was the difference. That was the fracture point. Humans had no center. No single authority. No unified control. Salek knew that. Everyone in the room knew that. And yet the rule remained. Unchanged. Unbending. If we waive the requirement, Salek said, his voice now colder, more precise, we undermine the foundation of the Council itself. No one argued that. Because it was true. But truth didn't solve the problem. Lethra leaned forward. Then we are left with only two outcomes, she said. Her eyes fixed on Salek. Either humanity produces a complete weapons inventory, or humanity is denied integration. The words settled like gravity. Heavy. Final. Inevitable. For a brief moment no one spoke. Because everyone in that chamber understood exactly what that meant. This wasn't just a bureaucratic hurdle anymore. This was a species-level judgment. Salek looked up at the floating directive once more. Human integration requirement. Pending. Then he said, very quietly, then we will require them to provide it. Salek didn't argue. He didn't defend. He simply gestured once and the system obeyed. The chamber lights dimmed as a new data construct unfolded above the table, larger than before, denser, layered in ways that strained even advanced perception filters. This, Salek said, is why the requirement exists. The model stabilized. At first, it looked simple. A single sphere, Earth, marked in soft blue. Then it fractured. Lines spread across its surface like cracks in glass. Borders.
Hundreds of them.
Then the fractures multiplied. The sphere split into projections, colonies, off-world settlements, orbital stations. Each one marked. Each one independent. 553 recognized governing bodies, Solek repeated. But that number is already outdated. The display updated. 561. A subtle shift moved through the room. They create new nations faster than we can catalog them, Solek continued. Political fragmentation is not a flaw in their system. He paused. It is their system. Zortha's upper eyes narrowed. That alone would be manageable, he said. Decentralized governance is inefficient, but not unprecedented. Solek nodded.
Correct.
Then he expanded the model. A second layer appeared. Not governments. Corporations. Massive entities, sprawling across multiple systems, their influence bleeding through borders as if those borders didn't exist at all. These, Solek said, are private organizations. The word private carried a strange weight. They develop weapons independently, he continued. They sell them, trade them, upgrade them, and in many cases, the display flickered. Entire sections went dark. They do not disclose their full capabilities to anyone. Lethra's internal systems pulsed faster. They hide them from their own governments? Yes. The answer was simple, and deeply unsettling. Zorth shifted slightly. That is inefficient. Solek's gaze sharpened. It is profitable. That silenced him, because profit-driven warfare was not something most species had ever normalized. Solek didn't stop. He expanded the model again. A third layer. This one was messy. Unstructured. Impossible to map cleanly. Black projects, he said. The term translated imperfectly across species. So he clarified. Unregistered development programs. Hidden facilities. Technologies that officially do not exist. The display struggled. Data points flickered in and out. Entire sections refused to resolve. We have confirmed their existence, Solek continued, but not their scope. Lethra leaned back slightly. You're telling us, she said slowly, that even human governments don't know what weapons exist within their own species. Solek met her gaze. Yes. That was the moment the room shifted. Not fear.
Not yet.
But something close. Because this was no longer complexity. This was loss of visibility. And in the Galactic Council, what couldn't be seen couldn't be controlled. Solek let the silence breathe for just a second, then delivered the final layer. And then, he said quietly, there are the individuals. The display zoomed in. No longer planets. No longer corporations.
People.
Millions of them. Each marked with a faint signal. Each representing personal ownership. Humans, Solek said, possess weapons privately. Zorth blinked. Once, slowly. Privately, he repeated. Yes. They are issued by governing bodies? No. They are registered? Sometimes. That answer was worse than no. Lethra's voice dropped. They build them? Yes. They hide them? Yes. They pass them down through generations? Yes. Each answer came faster, sharper, more final than the last. The display now looked like chaos given form. Governments, corporations, hidden programs, individuals, all layered on top of each other. None fully connected, none fully visible, none fully controllable. Zorth stared at it for a long moment, then finally said what everyone was thinking. This is not a weapons inventory problem. Solek tilted his head slightly. No, he agreed. It's not. Zortha's voice hardened. This is an information impossibility. And there it was. The real truth. Not spoken as opinion, but as conclusion. Solek didn't dismiss it, didn't argue, didn't soften it. Instead, he stepped forward one final time and collapsed the entire display into a single point of light. The room brightened again.
Clean.
Ordered. Controlled. The exact opposite of what they had just seen. And in that contrast, The problem became undeniable. No single human, Zorth continued, quieter now, could produce a complete list. No, Solek said. No single government could either. No. No corporation.
No.
Zorth's eyes locked onto him. Then the requirement cannot be fulfilled. The statement hung in the air.
Heavy. Certain.
Final. Solek looked at him, and for the first time since the meeting began, there was something different in his expression. Not doubt. Not concern. Something sharper. More dangerous. Individually? Solek said. A pause. Then,
No.
he let that word settle. Then added, but humanity has never been at its most dangerous individually. For a long moment, no one spoke. The data was gone. The projections cleared. But the weight of what they had just seen remained, pressing down on the chamber like gravity. Zorth broke first. This is a dead end. His voice wasn't frustrated anymore. It was certain. We are attempting to enforce a standard designed for unified civilizations on a species that has none. No one disagreed, because there was nothing left to argue. Lethra leaned forward slightly, her translucent skin dimming as her internal system slowed, an instinctive response to cognitive overload. Let us simplify the question, she said. Her tone had changed too. Less analytical, more final. Can any single human produce a complete inventory of their species' weapons? Solek didn't answer. He didn't need to. Zorth did it for him.
No.
The word landed cleanly. Lethra continued. Can any single human government produce that inventory? Again.
No.
Can any coalition of governments do so? A pause. A longer one this time. Zorth hesitated. Then, reluctantly,
No.
Because even alliances among humans were temporary, conditional, fragile. They shared information until they didn't. They cooperated until they competed. There was no stable structure to rely on. Lethra pressed forward. Can their corporations provide it? Zorth's response was immediate. They wouldn't. That was, in many ways, worse than inability. Refusal. Intentional secrecy. Profit over transparency. Lethra nodded slightly. And their hidden programs? Solek answered this one. They don't officially exist. Silence followed, because that answer said everything. You cannot catalog what is designed to be invisible. You cannot measure what is deliberately concealed. You cannot regulate what no one admits is real. Lethra sat back.
Slowly.
Deliberately. As I said before, she concluded, this is not a matter of cooperation. Her gaze moved across the chamber. It is a matter of impossibility. The word echoed again. Impossibility. But this time, no one challenged it. One by one, the delegates began signaling agreement. Subtle gestures. Lowered limbs. Dimmed bioluminescence. Closed sensory arrays. Different species. Same conclusion. Zorth turned back to Solek. You asked us to evaluate the feasibility of enforcing the integration requirement, he said. We have. A pause. Then clearly, it cannot be done.
There it was.
The official judgment. Not emotional. Not reactive. Purely logical. Backed by data.
Supported by every model they had.
Solek remained still. Completely still. His hands rested against the table. His posture unchanged. But behind that stillness, his mind was moving.
Fast. Precise.
Cutting through variables. Because he wasn't asking the same question anymore. They were asking. Backhand index pointing right, can humans produce the list? Solek was asking something else. Backhand index pointing right, what would force them to try? Zorth continued, unaware of the shift. The only viable recommendation, he said, is to suspend human integration indefinitely. Lethra nodded. Or terminate it entirely. Another ripple of agreement moved through the chamber. Because, from their perspective, this was already over. The problem had been analyzed, tested, broken down, and proven impossible. There was nothing left to do, except accept it. Solek finally moved. Just slightly. His fingers tapped once against the surface of the table. A small sound, but in the silence it carried. Let me ask you something, he said. Zorth paused. What? Salak's eyes lifted.
Cold.
Focused. Controlled. If the task is impossible, he said slowly, why are humans still alive? The question landed harder than anything else so far, because it didn't fit. It didn't follow the logic they had just built. Zorth frowned. That is not relevant. Salak didn't look away. It's the only thing that's relevant.
A pause.
Then he continued. By every metric we've just discussed, human civilization should not function. He gestured lightly toward where the display had been. Too fragmented. Too secretive. Too inconsistent. His voice lowered slightly. And yet, he let the words hang. They build. They expand. They survive. The room shifted again. Not agreement.
Not yet.
But something had cracked. A flaw in the logic. Lethra spoke carefully. Survival does not imply order. No, Salak agreed. It implies something else. Zortha's eyes narrowed. And what would that be? Salak finally straightened. Fully. Deliberately. And when he spoke again, there was no hesitation left. Adaptation. A pause. Then, they don't need a system that works. They are the system. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because that idea was dangerous. It meant unpredictability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. Zorth shook his head. That changes nothing, he said. The requirement still stands. And it still cannot be fulfilled. Salak looked at him, and for the first time, there was the faintest hint of something behind his expression. Not doubt. Not concern. Something sharper. Almost like anticipation. Not like this, Salak said. Zorth frowned. What does that mean? Salak's voice dropped. Quiet. Controlled.
Certain.
It means a small pause. Just enough to pull everyone in. We've been asking the wrong question. No one spoke. Not immediately. Because everyone in the chamber understood what Salak had just done. He hadn't solved the problem. He had reframed it. Zorth was the first to respond, his tone sharp with irritation. Then ask your question, he said. And let us be done with this. Salak nodded once.
Calm.
Controlled. Then he said, what would force humans to cooperate, even when it is against their nature? Silence. Not confusion this time, but resistance. Because they all already knew the answer. They just didn't like it. Lethra spoke carefully.
Pressure, she said.
Zorth added. Mutual threat. Another delegate, a thin, chitin-armored observer from the outer systems, clicked his mandibles softly. Competition, he suggested. Salak's gaze moved across them. Yes, he said. All of those. Then he took a step forward. And we can create all of them at once. That got their attention. Zortha's upper eyes narrowed.
How?
Salak didn't answer immediately. Instead, he activated the display again. But this time, it didn't show data. It showed people. Human representatives.
Hundreds of them.
From different worlds, different governments, different factions. A fragmented species visualized. What if, Salak said slowly, we stop asking them individually? Zorth frowned. That changes nothing. Salak looked at him. No, he said. It changes everything. He expanded the projection. More humans appeared. More factions. More divisions. Until the display was crowded with faces, symbols, and conflicting identities. Individually, Salak continued, they will refuse. Collectively, he paused. They will compete. Lethra's internal systems flickered. You're suggesting we coordinate them? Salak shook his head.
No.
A small pause. Then, I'm suggesting we trap them. That word landed hard. Zorth straightened slightly. Clarify. Salak's voice remained calm. Almost too calm.
We summon them, he said.
All of them. A ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber.
All.
Zorth repeated. Yes. Every recognized human authority. Every government. Every major faction with representation. He gestured toward the display. 500. 600. However many it takes. Lethra's voice dropped. That would be the largest diplomatic gathering in recorded history. Yes. And your plan is to what? Ask them politely to cooperate. Solek's expression didn't change.
No.
A beat. Then, we remove their ability to leave. Silence.
Total.
Absolute. Even the ambient systems seemed to dim slightly. Zorth stared at him. You want to detain 600 human representatives, he said slowly, and refuse to release them until they complete an impossible task. Solek nodded once. Yes. That is not a strategy, Zorth snapped. That is a provocation. It is leverage, Solek corrected. Lethra leaned forward, her voice tight. They will refuse. Yes. They will argue. Yes. They will fight. A faint pause. Then Solek said, yes. The admission caught them off guard, because he wasn't denying the chaos. He was counting on it. Zortha's tone hardened. And when they fail? Solek's eyes locked onto his. Then they fail publicly. Another shift.
Subtle.
But powerful. Because now, the audience changed. This wasn't just about humans anymore. This was about everyone watching them. Solek stepped closer to the center of the chamber. We make it clear, he said, that their integration depends on this. His voice lowered, sharpened. Every species in the council will be watching. A pause. Every failure will be visible. Another pause. Every delay I judged. Lethra's systems pulsed faster. You're weaponizing perception. Yes. Solek didn't hesitate. Zorth exhaled slowly. They will still fail. Solek tilted his head slightly. Individually, he said. Yes. Zorth hesitated. Then, yes. Solek's voice dropped to almost a whisper. But they won't be alone. That was the key. That was the shift. Humans didn't cooperate well, but they competed extremely well. Put them together. Force them to compare. Force them to prove something. And suddenly, everything changed. Lethra saw it first. Her posture stiffened slightly. You believe, she said slowly, that they will attempt the impossible simply to avoid losing to each other. Solek met her gaze. Yes. Zorth shook his head. That is irrational. Solek's response was immediate. They are irrational. Silence. Because that was true. Painfully true. Zorth looked around the chamber. At the other delegates. At their reactions. Some uncertain. Some uneasy. Some considering it. This could destabilize them, Zorth said. Solek nodded. Yes. It could provoke conflict. Yes. It could fail catastrophically. Another pause. Then, yes. Zorth stared at him. Then why do it? Solek's answer came, without hesitation. Because it's the only thing that might work. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of impossibility. It was the silence of risk. Because for the first time, there was a path forward. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Potentially disastrous. But real. Lethra leaned back slowly. And if they succeed? She asked. Solek didn't smile. But something in his eyes shifted. If they succeed, he said, then we will finally understand what humanity is capable of. The plan should have failed before it even began. That was the first thought Solek had repeatedly over the 3 months that followed. Not because it was flawed, but because it required cooperation from humans before the test had even started. And yet, somehow, it worked. Not smoothly, not cleanly, but it worked. 3 months earlier, the first transmissions had been ignored. That was expected. Formal invitations sent from the Galactic Standards Committee carried authority, but humans did not respond to authority alone.
So the tone changed.
The second wave of messages introduced incentives, access to trade routes, technological exchanges, expanded diplomatic recognition. That got attention. The third wave introduced something else. Consequences. Not threats, never framed as threats, but clear, undeniable outcomes. Failure to comply would result in termination of integration. No council membership. No shared protections. No access to interstellar infrastructure. That got results. They responded, one by one, then in clusters, then all at once. Questions flooded in. Demands for clarification. Arguments over jurisdiction. Disputes about representation. Some governments insisted on sending multiple delegates. Others refused to attend unless rival factions were excluded. Several attempted to negotiate the terms entirely. One corporation submitted a proposal offering to buy exemption from the requirement. Another suggested outsourcing the entire problem to an artificial intelligence. Salek rejected all of it. Every request, every adjustment, every attempt to reshape the rules. The message remained the same. Backhand index pointing right, attend. Or be excluded. Nothing more. Nothing less. Division of labor. The committee fractured the workload. Zorith handled corporate entities, navigating profit structures, leveraging competition, turning rivalries into compliance. Lethra managed centralized governments, negotiating through layers of bureaucracy, aligning incentives with stability. The outer system delegates dealt with fringe groups, colonies, independent settlements, ideologically driven collectives that didn't respond to traditional authority at all. Salek took the rest. The difficult ones. The unpredictable ones. The ones that didn't fit any model. And there were many. The unpredictable ones. One human faction responded with a single message. Define weapon. Another sent a document over 200 pages long. Not an answer. A philosophical argument about whether information itself could be considered a weapon. One group refused to attend on principle, then showed up anyway. Unannounced. Unregistered. Already inside the system before clearance had been granted. Security flagged it. Salek approved them, because at this point, consistency was no longer expected. The venue problem. No existing facility was large enough. That alone should have ended the plan. The Galactic Council's main assembly hall could accommodate representatives from every known species. But not this. Not one species fractured into hundreds. It was excessive, absurd, perfectly human. Eventually, a solution was found. A structure belonging to the Gorith, a species of massive proportions who built their ceremonial halls on a scale that bordered on architectural insanity. The ceiling stretched beyond comfortable perception. Pillars the size of warships held it in place. The space could hold them.
Barely. Final day.
Salek stood before the entrance. The doors alone were larger than most transport vessels. Behind them, 600 human representatives. Already inside. Already talking. Already arguing. Even through the sealed structure, the noise leaked out. A constant, chaotic hum. Zorith stood beside him. They're early, he noted. Salek didn't react. Of course they were. Some of them. Others would be late. Some wouldn't show at all. And somehow, they would all still be there. Lethra approached from the opposite side. All registered delegates have arrived, she said. A pause. Then added. And 32 additional unregistered participants. Salek nodded. Of course. Zorith exhaled slowly. This is already out of control. Salek looked at the door. No, he said quietly. Not yet. The pattern break. As the doors began to open, something caught Zorith's attention. A detail in the incoming data stream. He frowned. There's an anomaly, he said. Salek didn't look away from the entrance. Define. Zorith hesitated. One of the human representatives is not human. That got Salek's attention. He turned slightly.
What?
Lethra checked the data. Confirmed it. Designation, allied species representative, she said. Elected by a human colony. The doors opened.
Slowly. Heavily.
And there, among the sea of human faces, was something else. Covered in fur. Tail swaying behind her.
Calm. Composed.
Entirely out of place. Zorith stared. They chose that as their representative? Salek watched her for a moment, then said, very quietly, they chose someone they trust. Inside the hall, the noise surged, voices overlapping, languages colliding, arguments already forming before the session had even begun. Zorith shook his head. This will fail. Salek stepped forward, toward the chaos, toward the impossible, toward the experiment that should never have worked.
Probably, he said.
A small pause. Then, but I'd like to see how. And with that, he walked inside. The sound hit first. Not gradually, not in layers, all at once. A wall of noise slammed into Solek the moment he crossed the threshold, voices overlapping, clashing, rising and falling in a dozen different tonal ranges. It wasn't a conversation. It was a collision. Inside the hall, the scale of it was overwhelming. Rows upon rows of seating curved outward in a massive arc, each section filled with human representatives, and none of them behaving the same way. Some stood. Some sat.
Some were already arguing.
Others were laughing. Several appeared to be conducting entirely unrelated negotiations. One group had formed a tight circle, speaking rapidly over a shared display. Another had split into factions within their own delegation. And everywhere, movement. Uncontrolled. Uncoordinated. Unfiltered. Zorth stopped just inside the entrance. He began, then stopped, because there was no word for it. Solek didn't slow. He walked forward, step by step, through the noise, through the chaos, toward the center of the chamber. Fragments of humanity. As he moved, pieces of conversation broke through the noise. You can't seriously expect us to. That's classified. We're not sharing. If they don't, we don't. This violates 3 separate treaties. We should walk out. We can't walk out. They'll use that. This is a trap. Of course it's a trap. A burst of laughter from somewhere behind him.
Sharp.
Almost hysterical. The first conflict. It happened before Solek reached the center. 2 representatives, different factions, different worlds, rose at the same time. Voices escalated. Hands moved. One shoved the other. Not hard, but enough. Enough to trigger something deeper. Within seconds, others were involved. Pulling them apart.
Taking sides.
Arguing over the argument. Zorth stiffened. They're already fracturing. Solek didn't respond. Because this was expected. More fractures. Across the hall, another disturbance. A delegate climbed onto their seat, elevating themselves above the crowd, shouting something in a language the translators struggled to process in real time. Gesturing. Demanding attention. Some listened. Most didn't. A third conflict sparked near the outer rows. Not physical. Verbal. But louder.
Sharper.
More intense. Lethra's systems pulsed rapidly. This is unsustainable, she said. They haven't even heard the requirement yet. And still it grew. The noise didn't stabilize. It escalated. Because humans didn't wait for structure. They filled the absence of it. Conversations multiplied. Arguments overlapped. Small disagreements became larger ones simply because they were competing to be heard. Solek reached the center platform. Stopped. Waited. Just for a second. Because this moment was important. The address. He activated the amplification system. The floor beneath him resonated, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ambassadors of humanity. The effect was immediate. Not silence. Not yet. But disruption. Heads turned. Voices lowered. Attention shifted unevenly, reluctantly, but enough. I am Director Solek, he continued, of the Galactic Standards Committee. More voices stopped. More eyes focused. The chaos didn't disappear, but it narrowed, converged. You have been summoned here, he said, to fulfill a requirement for your species' integration into the Galactic Council. A murmur spread. Recognition. Suspicion. Irritation. All species, Solek continued, must provide a complete and verified inventory of their weapons systems. That was the breaking point. The noise surged again. Louder. Sharper. Angrier. The reaction. That's impossible. We've said this already. You don't have jurisdiction. Define weapon. Who gets access to this data? This is a violation of. We are not handing over classified. This is a security risk. Voices stacked on top of each other. Competing. Clashing. Refusing to align. Solek raised his voice. Amplified. Dominant. You will produce this inventory collectively. That word, collectively, hit like impact. And the reaction was immediate. Explosion.
No.
We will not. That's not how this works. You can't force cooperation. We don't even cooperate with each other. A bitter laugh echoed from somewhere in the middle rows. Good luck with that. More laughter. Not amused. Not friendly. The kind that comes from knowing something is about to fail. Zorath whispered from behind. This is over. Salek ignored him. The final condition. You have 1 week, Salek said. That cut through everything. Not completely, but enough. 7 standard cycles, he continued. This facility will remain sealed. A pause. Then, you may communicate externally. You may coordinate. You may negotiate. Another pause. Then the line that changed everything. But you will not leave until the task is complete. Total breakdown. The reaction was instant. Explosive. A man stood on his chair. You're detaining us. Another shouted back. Sit down, you're making it worse. Someone threw something. It didn't reach the center. But it didn't need to. The message was clear. Multiple arguments ignited at once. Not one conflict. Many. Parallel. Intersecting. Uncontrollable. Lethra stepped closer to Salek. This is collapsing. Zorath added, flat. They will fail. Salek's final words. Salek didn't raise his voice this time. He didn't need to. The amplification carried it.
Clear. Cold.
Unavoidable. The entire Galactic Council is observing this process. That changed the tone. Not calmer, but sharper. More aware. Your success, he continued, will grant you full integration. A pause. Your failure. Another pause. Will end it. Silence didn't follow, but something else did.
Wait.
Because now, this wasn't just chaos. It was judged chaos. Exit. Salek turned. Didn't wait. Didn't respond to the shouting. The arguing. The rising noise behind him. Zorath and Lethra followed. Step by step. Toward the exit. The doors began to close. And just before they sealed, Salek glanced back. What he saw. 2 delegates being pulled apart. One standing above the others, shouting. Several groups already forming alliances. Others isolating themselves. Chaos.
Pure.
Unfiltered. Exactly as predicted. The doors shut. The noise cut off instantly, leaving only silence in the corridor. Zorath exhaled slowly. They're going to destroy each other in there. Salek didn't respond immediately, because deep down, he knew something they didn't. Or maybe, he hoped. We'll see, he said quietly. Exactly 1 week later, the corridor was silent. Not quiet in the ordinary sense. Not the absence of sound, but the kind of silence that felt unnatural. Like something had burned itself out. Outside the hall, Salek stood alone before the massive doors. Zorath and Lethra were running final system checks behind him, their movements slower than usual, measured, cautious. No one rushed this moment, because everyone expected the same outcome. Failure. Zorath broke the silence. No external distress signals, he said. No attempts to breach containment. A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, no communication directed at us. Lethra added quietly. The internal noise levels dropped significantly 3 cycles ago. Salek didn't turn. Define significantly. Lethra checked the data again. By 92%. That got his attention. He turned slightly. That's not collapse behavior, Zorath said. No, Salek agreed. It isn't. The possibility. For the first time, a new thought entered the space between them. Not certainty. Not even confidence. But something else. Uncomfortable. Unwelcome. Backhand index pointing right, what if they didn't fail? Zorath dismissed it immediately.
They're exhausted, he said.
Conflict decay. Nothing more. Lethra wasn't as sure. Or they reached a temporary equilibrium, she said. Zorath shook his head. Humans don't stabilize under pressure. Salek looked at the door. They do, he said quietly.
A pause.
Just not in ways we expect. Final call. A communication signal activated in Salek's hand. He glanced at it. The identifier alone was enough to straighten his posture. Council presidency. He accepted. The voice that followed was deep, controlled, ancient. Director Salek. Madam President. You are about to conclude the human integration trial. Yes. A brief pause. We have been monitoring the situation closely, she continued. Your approach was unconventional. Solek chose his words carefully. It was necessary. Another pause. Then, do you believe they succeeded? The question hung there, heavy, because for the first time, Solek didn't have a clear answer. I believe, he said slowly, they were forced to try. That was enough. For the council, she said. The connection ended. The doors open. Solek stepped forward, placed his hand against the access panel. For a brief moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, but anticipation, because whatever waited on the other side would define everything that came next. The mechanism engaged. The doors began to open, slowly, heavily, and as the gap widened, the first thing that emerged was not sound. It was stillness. Inside the hall, the contrast was immediate, jarring, almost impossible. The chaos was gone. No shouting, no fighting, no overlapping arguments. Instead, order. Not perfect, not clean, but undeniable. Humans sat in organized clusters, grouped, structured, focused. Displays were active. Documents were being reviewed. Information was being transferred between sections. Quiet conversations replaced screaming ones. Coordination replaced conflict. Zorth stepped forward slowly. That's not possible. Lethra's internal systems flickered rapidly. They've reorganized. Solek said nothing, because he understood something in that moment. Something the others didn't. This wasn't peace. This was functionality. The humans, they looked different. That was the second thing. Exhaustion was visible everywhere. Darkened eyes, disheveled clothing, postures that suggested minimal rest. But beneath that, there was something else. Focus, purpose, and something even more unsettling. Agreement. Not total, not perfect, but enough. The shift. As Solek walked toward the center, heads turned. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but gradually. Awareness spreading through the room. The system had changed. They had changed. Zorth whispered. This shouldn't have worked. Solek didn't respond, because now, he wasn't thinking about whether it worked. He was thinking about how. The first sign. Solek reached the center platform, paused, then spoke. Ambassadors. The word carried. Clear. Controlled. This time, they listened. No shouting. No interruption. Just attention. That alone was enough to unsettle the entire committee. I trust, Solek continued. You have made progress. A brief silence followed. Then, a voice from the front. Calm. Measured. Yes. Just one word. But it hit harder than any argument from the previous week. Zorth froze. Lethra's system spiked. Solek's eyes narrowed slightly. Clarify, he said. The same voice responded. We have completed the task. Impact. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Because the statement didn't fit. It didn't align with any model, any prediction, any logic they had built. Zorth finally found his voice. That is not possible. The human didn't react, didn't argue, didn't defend. Just said, it is done. The calm before the twist. Solek studied them. All of them. The room. The structure. The order. The exhaustion. The quiet confidence. And for the first time, a small, unfamiliar thought formed in his mind. Backhand index pointing right, we may have underestimated them. He didn't say it. Not yet. Instead, he gave a single instruction. Then present it. For a moment, no one moved. The statement still hung in the air. Backhand index pointing right, it is done. Solek studied the speaker. An older human. Calm. Composed. Tired, but not uncertain. That detail mattered. Because humans argued when they were unsure. They shouted when they were divided. But this one was neither. The first crack. Solek spoke carefully. You are stating, he said, that you have produced a complete inventory of all human weapon systems. Yes. No hesitation. No qualifiers. Zorth stepped forward. That is not possible, he said flatly. Your own representatives declared it impossible. The human nodded slightly. They were correct.
A pause.
Then, for individuals. That word again. Individually. Salek felt something shift. A subtle misalignment in expectation. Then explain, he said. The misunderstanding. The human gestured behind him. Bring it forward. For a second. Nothing happened. Then movement. Several humans stood. Walked toward the far side of the chamber. Zorth leaned toward Salek. If this is an attempt at deception. Salek raised a hand.
Wait.
The reveal begins. Something moved into view. A container. Large. Metallic. Then another.
And another.
They were stacked. Organized. Deliberate. Zorth frowned. Physical documentation? Lethra's systems flickered. That's inefficient. The humans returned to the center. One of them placed a single object on a table before Salek.
A book. Thick. Dense.
He stared at it. This is your inventory? He asked. The human tilted his head slightly.
No.
A small pause. Then, that's volume 1. Collision impact. Silence. Absolute. Total. Zorth didn't speak.
Couldn't.
Salek's fingers moved, slowly, toward the cover. Clarify, he said. The human did.
Calmly.
Precisely. There are 47 volumes in total. The second wave. The words hit harder than expected, because now, the scale had shifted. Not impossible, possible, but impossible, excessive. Lethra stepped forward. 47. Yes. Each containing? Approximately 800 pages. Zortha's voice lowered. That is unnecessary. The human shook his head. No, he said. It's complete. The third wave. Salek opened the book. His eyes scanned the first page. Title. Classification. Structure. Then the contents.
Categories. Hundreds of them.
Primitive weapons. Mechanical weapons. Chemical. Biological. Energy-based. Experimental. The list kept going. And going. And going. His fingers flipped a page. Then another. Detailed diagrams. Measurements. Variants. Usage history. Cross-references. He stopped. Because this wasn't a summary. It wasn't an overview. It wasn't even documentation. It was everything. The final blow. How extensive? Salek asked slowly. Is the full dataset? The human didn't hesitate. 47 physical volumes, he said. A pause. Then, and approximately 900 million digital files. Bomb total silence. No reaction. Because no one in the chamber had a framework for that number. Zortha's voice came out strained. Million? Yes. Lethra's systems surged uncontrollably. That level of data processing is ongoing, the human said calmly. Upload will complete within your cycle. The realization begins. Salek's mind raced. Not in panic. In calculation. Because something wasn't adding up. Not the scale. Not the effort. Not the cooperation. Something deeper. Something wrong. The turning point. He looked up. At the humans. Really looked this time. They weren't just tired. They were satisfied. Some were smiling. Others watching. Waiting. Like they knew something he didn't. And that's when it hit him. The question. Why? Salek asked. Not formal. Not controlled. Just.
Why?
The human in front of him smiled slightly. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just knowing. Because you asked us to. The real twist collision. And suddenly, everything aligned. The requirement. The pressure. The audience. The rules. Salek's eyes widened slightly. We asked for an inventory. Yes. And you provided. Everything. The human leaned forward just slightly. And said the line that changed everything. Backhand index pointing right. All of it is public now. High voltage impact cascade. Zorth froze. Lethra stopped moving entirely. Salek didn't blink. Because now, he understood. Not just what they had done, but what it meant. The truth. They hadn't just complied. They had obeyed perfectly. Every weapon, every design, every classification, every theory.
Shared. Documented.
Accessible. To anyone. The final strike. Another human spoke from the side. Tone casual. Almost amused. Congratulations, Director. A pause. Then, backhand index pointing right. You just gave the entire galaxy a blueprint for human warfare. Skull realization. Salek closed the book slowly. Because now, the problem wasn't solved. It had multiplied. Exponentially. Uncontrollably. Irreversibly. The last line.
The first human stepped back. Still calm.
Still composed. Still tired. We completed the task, he said. A small pause. Then, you just didn't think about the consequences. Salek didn't remember leaving the hall. Not clearly. One moment he was standing there, holding the first volume, understanding. The next, he was outside. The door sealed behind him. And for the first time in his entire career, he had no idea what to do next. The first reports, they came within hours. Faster than any crisis protocol could contain. Zorith intercepted the first one. Then another. Then dozens. His voice, when he spoke, was tighter than Salek had ever heard it. The files are spreading. Salek didn't respond. Not yet. Because part of him already knew. They're not contained to council networks, Zorith continued. They're being copied, replicated, distributed. Lethra's systems flared violently. By whom? Zorith hesitated. Then said, everyone. Day 1. Every species in the Galactic Council received access. That was expected. That was part of the agreement. What wasn't expected was how quickly that access expanded. Secondary networks, private channels, black markets, independent data streams. Within a single rotation, the entire galaxy had it. Month 1. The first incident occurred in a peripheral trade zone. A minor piracy group. Unremarkable. Previously insignificant. They deployed a weapon they should not have understood, let alone built. A kinetic impact system.
Crude.
Imperfect, but effective. The outposts they targeted did not survive. Month 3. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't contained.
It was a pattern.
Groups that had never possessed advanced weaponry now had access, not just to designs, but to instructions, explanations, optimizations. Human documentation didn't just describe weapons. It taught them, step by step. Year 1. The Council's peacekeeping forces were no longer maintaining order. They were reacting to collapse. Criminal organizations evolved into military powers. Fringe factions became dominant threats. Entire systems destabilized. Because for the first time, power was no longer centralized. It was available. Year 5. The term emerged slowly. First in internal reports, then in official records, then everywhere. Backhand index pointing right, the lost century. Not because it had ended, but because no one could see how it would. The core problem. It wasn't just the weapons. It was the knowledge. Human design philosophy. Human efficiency. Human adaptability. Their systems weren't just powerful. They were accessible, modular, scalable, replicable. Other species didn't just copy them. They improved them, twisted them, weaponized them in ways even humans hadn't considered. The irony. And through all of it, humanity didn't fall. They advanced. Faster than before. Because now, they weren't just competing with each other. They were competing with the entire galaxy. And that was something they understood perfectly. Salek's realization. Years later, Salek stood in a much smaller chamber. Quieter, dimmer. The kind of room reserved for reflection or consequences. The original volume sat before him. Untouched. Unchanged. He hadn't opened it again. Didn't need to. He already knew what was inside. Everything. That had been the mistake. Not the plan. Not the execution. The assumption. He had believed that knowledge could be controlled. That information could be contained. That systems, if designed correctly, could manage chaos. He had been wrong. The truth. Humans didn't break the system. They followed it.
Perfectly.
And in doing so, they exposed its greatest flaw. The final outcome.
The council changed.
It had to. Old protocols were abandoned. Weapons disclosure requirements eliminated entirely. New systems built around uncertainty, adaptation, containment, not control. And at the center of it all, humanity, not as a problem, not as a candidate, but as a necessity, because no one understood the chaos better than the ones who had created it. Final reflection. Solek looked at the volume one last time, then finally spoke.
Not to a room.
Not to a council, but to himself. Quietly.
Slowly. Carefully.
I gave them a problem. A pause.
Then.
And they gave us a future we weren't ready for. Skull final line. He closed his eyes. And for the first time, he understood the true nature of humanity. Backhand index pointing right, they don't destroy systems. Backhand index pointing right, they teach them how to fail.